My name is Brittany Walker. I was 31 years old when my family erased me from their story, and 34 when I realized they had done me the greatest favor of my life, even if it took everything I had to see it that way. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end. It was a Wednesday in early October when everything began to end. I remember the specific quality of the light that afternoon, the way the autumn sun came through the single window of my studio in Providence, Rhode Island, casting a long rectangle of gold across the floor where my fabric samples were spread out. I was cross-legged on that floor, eating a late lunch of a cold turkey sandwich I'd made that morning, watching a free YouTube tutorial on color theory for residential spaces. I had a notebook open beside me, and I was writing down things like warm undertones in north-facing rooms, and never pair cool gray with aged wood unless you want the room to fight itself. I was proud of that notebook. Ridiculous maybe, but true. I couldn't afford a proper design course. The software license for AutoCAD had already cost me 3 months of careful saving, so I learned the way people have always learned when money is tight. I watched, I read, I practiced on every small project I could find. That week, I was working on a living room refresh for a young couple in Cranston. Budget? $950, including my fee. I had sketched 4 different layout options for them and was debating which one to present first. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. Mom. I looked at the screen for a moment before I picked it up. Not because I didn't want to talk to her, or maybe because some part of me, some quiet animal instinct, already sensed that this call was different. The text was short, even by Merrill Walker standards. Family meeting, Sunday, don't be late, that was it. No question mark, no explanation, no hope you're doing well, honey, or even the perfunctory love mom she sometimes added when she remembered to seem warm. Just an instruction, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never once considered that the recipient might not simply comply. I set the phone down and looked back at my notebook. Something in her tone, even through a text message you can feel a person's tone, was off. Sharper than usual, more deliberate, like a sentence that had been written and rewritten before being sent. I almost didn't go. I want you to know that. I almost texted back something vague about a client deadline and let the weekend pass quietly in my studio with my fabric samples and my cold sandwiches and my YouTube tutorials. But it was family. And despite everything, despite the long history of small diminishments that I had spent most of my adult life trying not to catalog, I still went when they called. That had always been my particular weakness. I left Providence before 7 on Sunday morning, when the October sky was still gray and the streets were empty. I drove the 2.5 hours to Greenwich, Connecticut on autopilot, the kind of driving you do when your hands know the route and your mind is somewhere else entirely. I hadn't been home in 4 months. The last time was a brief visit in June, my father's birthday dinner, attended by 12 people, catered by a woman Merrill hired for special occasions. Notable primarily for the 45 minutes I sat at the end of the table without anyone directing a question to me. My sister Zendaya had just made senior associate at her accounting firm. That was the main topic of conversation. I had nodded and smiled and eaten my salmon and driven home to Providence the same night because there was no room offered for me to stay. Now, pulling onto the street where I had grown up, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that I had never managed to fully explain to anyone. Greenwich is beautiful in October. The old trees along the residential streets turn copper and amber, and the houses, large, set back from the road, surrounded by lawns maintained to a standard just below ostentation, look like illustrations from a catalog called This Is What Success Looks Like. The Walker house was stone facade, black shutters, a wide front porch that was always swept but rarely sat on. I had grown up inside those walls, and yet the house had never felt like it belonged to me. It felt like a stage set for a family story in which I was a minor character, present in the early scenes, gradually written out as the plot moved toward its real protagonist. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a moment. Through the front windows, I could see movement, people already inside, already seated. More people than a normal Sunday family lunch. I counted at least 8 heads before I got out of the car. Inside, it was 14 people. 14, including me. The dining room table had been extended to its full length. I hadn't seen it like that since Thanksgiving 3 years ago. My grandmother Dorothy sat nearest the window, hands folded in her lap, her face wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. My father's younger brother, Uncle Dennis, was beside her, his jaw set, his eyes finding mine for just a moment before looking back at the table. Aunts, cousins, family friends who had known me since I was a child in barrettes and 2 big sweaters. At the head of the table sat Gerald Ashton, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain, a leather folder open in front of him. I recognized Gerald. He had been my parents' estate attorney for as long as I could remember, the kind of man who speaks only when necessary and charges accordingly. My father, Clint Walker, stood behind his chair with his arms crossed. He was 61 years old and still looked like a man who had spent his career being the most certain person in every room. He did not greet me when I walked in. My mother, Meryl, was seated at the opposite end of the table from Gerald. She gestured to the one remaining chair, at the far end, away from everyone, the chair that had clearly been left for me, the chair that was not beside anyone. And there, to my father's right, sat my sister. Zendaya Walker was 35 years old and looked, as she always did, like a person who had curated herself into an argument. Pressed blazer, pearl earrings, hair pulled back in a way that said I took care of this, and it didn't take me long. She didn't look at me when I came in, but her posture, the slight lift of her chin, the stillness of her hands, told me everything. She already knew. On the table in front of the empty chair at the far end, there was a single document. My name was printed at the top in clean 12-point type. I sat down. The chair was cold. My father cleared his throat. Let's get started. Gerald Ashton opened his leather folder and began to read in the flat, affectless tone of a man who has delivered unwelcome news so many times that he has learned to remove himself from the act entirely. The Walker family estate. Total estimated value, $3.8 million. The primary residence on Greenfield Lane, Greenwich. The vacation property at Cape Cod. The investment accounts established jointly by Clint and Meryl Walker. The trust fund created by Harvey Walker, my grandfather, dead 6 years now, and maintained in the family's name. Every item was listed clearly, methodically, and beside every item, in the column where 2 names might reasonably have appeared, was one name, Zendaya Ann Walker. I listened to the whole thing before I spoke. I have always been someone who needs to hear the full sentence before I respond, a quality that has been mistaken over the years for passivity when really it is just precision. When Gerald finished, I looked at my father. And me? Clint Walker adjusted his left cufflink. He stared at a point just past my shoulder, not at me, not quite at the wall, somewhere in the neutral territory between us where he didn't have to see my face. My mother filled the silence. She had always been good at that. We need to be honest with you, Brittany. Meryl's voice was measured and calm, the voice she used for difficult conversations she had prepared for in advance. Your father and I have thought about this for a long time. She paused. Not for effect, or maybe for effect. With Meryl, it was always hard to tell. 6 years ago, when you left the accounting program at UConn to transfer into design, we supported that. We didn't agree with it, but we supported it. Another pause. 4 years ago, when you asked for money to start your business, we gave you $15,000. We didn't ask for it back. We didn't set conditions. I used that money for equipment and software, I said. I have every receipt. I know you do. Her chin lifted slightly. But receipts aren't results, Brittany. You've been running this business for 2 years and you're still doing $900 projects for strangers in Rhode Island. You're 31 years old and you have $2,800 in your checking account. We know because we've been worried enough to look. The room was very quiet. I want to tell you what it feels like to have your bank balance read aloud in front of 14 people, some of whom you have known your entire life. It doesn't feel like humiliation exactly. It feels like something more fundamental than that, like being told that the private internal landscape of your struggle, the thing you navigate alone every day, has been surveilled and summarized and is now being used as evidence against you. Like the jury has been deliberating for years and they only just told you there was a trial. We did what we believed was best, my mother continued. The estate goes to Zendaya. She has demonstrated the kind of financial responsibility and professional stability that makes us confident the family's assets will be protected. Financial responsibility, I said. Yes, Zendaya is a CPA. I'm a designer. Those are different careers. They're not different levels of worth. Meryl looked at me with an expression that was almost kind. The kindness of someone explaining something self-evident to a person who simply isn't seeing it. We're not saying that, Brittany, but they were. They absolutely were. Gerald Ashton cleared his throat and slid the document toward me. A relinquishment of inheritance rights, pre-drafted, tabbed at the signature lines in 3 places, efficient as a tax return. We'll need your signature to finalize the transfer. I looked at the document. I looked at the pen Gerald had placed beside it. I looked at my father, who still had not looked at me. And then I looked at my sister. For just a moment, one fraction of a second that she didn't intend for me to catch, Zendaya's eyes met mine. She looked away immediately. Too immediately. The way people look away from something they don't want to be seen seeing. She had known about this, not just recently. For a while. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. That surprised me more than anything else about that afternoon. I had expected my hands to shake, my voice to break, something inside me to crack open and spill across Gerald Ashton's carefully tabbed documents. Instead, I felt something that I would later come to understand was not strength exactly, but its cousin, the kind of stillness that arrives when a thing you have dreaded for a long time finally happens, and you discover that the dread was worse than the event. I heard you, I said to no one in particular. I signed. I stood up before the ink was dry. My chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound that seemed too loud for the silence in the room. Nobody said wait. Nobody said, "Are you okay?" Nobody said her name. The room exhaled, not with relief, but with the collective release of people who have completed something uncomfortable and are ready to move on. I walked down the hallway toward the front door. My footsteps echoed. To my left, the gallery wall, the one that ran the length of the hall and had always been arranged by my mother with the precision of someone curating a museum of her own life. Zendaya at NYU graduation. Zendaya accepting a professional award at a dinner somewhere. Gold lettering on a plaque I couldn't read from a distance. Zendaya and my parents on a balcony in what looked like Italy, everyone squinting into the sun, everyone smiling. I had known for at least a year that there were no photographs of me on that wall. I had noticed it the June visit and made myself not say anything, made myself file it under maybe they're being rearranged, maybe there's a plan because it is easier to believe in the possibility of oversight than in the certainty of erasure. Standing at the end of that hallway, hand on the front door, I understood. There had never been a plan. The wall had been curated. I had been curated out of it. I opened the door. October had gotten colder while I was inside. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. A text from Zendaya. No hard feelings, okay? This was a business decision. I hope you understand. I read it once. Standing on the front walk in the cold, leaves coming down from the big oak at the edge of the property, I read my sister's 11 words and understood them completely. I deleted the text. I would spend a long time later wishing I hadn't. I want to pause here for just a moment because there is something about that hallway I haven't told you yet, something that matters more than the photographs themselves. The wall had not always looked like that. When I was 19, the summer before I transferred to design school, I had helped my mother rehang every photograph on that wall. We'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon doing it, measuring the spacing with a ruler, stepping back to check the arrangement, laughing when something was crooked. There had been pictures of both of us on that wall then. Me at my high school graduation, squinting into the sun. Me and Zendaya as children, both in Halloween costumes I can no longer name. Me and my father at a minor league baseball game when I was maybe 10. Both of us holding enormous foam fingers and looking genuinely delighted about something. Those photographs had existed. I had hung some of them myself. At some point in the past several years, they had been taken down. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious, too deliberate, even for my mother. One by one, I think. Slowly enough that each individual absence could be explained away as reorganization. And only the final result, a wall of Zendaya, a wall without me, told the true story. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing you are being erased slowly enough that you almost didn't notice. It is quieter than the grief that arrives all at once. It has no sharp edges. It just settles into you like cold water, filling the spaces you didn't know were hollow. I started the car. The drive back to Providence was 2.5 hours. I made it 40 minutes before I had to pull over. Not because I was crying. I wasn't, not yet. But because my hands had started to shake, finally, delayed, the way the body sometimes waits until you are alone and moving before it lets you feel what just happened. I parked on the shoulder of I-95 and turned off the engine. Cars streamed past in the gray afternoon. I sat with my hands in my lap and I let the weight of it settle. 40 minutes. Then I started the car again and drove home. My studio was exactly as I had left it, the fabric samples on the floor. The client's layout sketched on the whiteboard I'd propped against the wall, a coffee mug on the counter with the handle turned at the angle I always leave it, the notebook with my color theory notes open to the page about warm undertones. I checked my bank account on my phone, $2,812. No family, no safety net, no one coming. I sat on the kitchen floor that night, just the floor, no chair, some instinct toward groundedness. And I made a list, not of what I had lost, of what I still had. Skills, design, spatial reasoning, color sense, the ability to listen to what a client actually needs versus what they think they want. Equipment, laptop, AutoCAD license, a decent camera I'd bought secondhand. Reputation, small but mine. 3 clients who had paid me and left satisfied. One who had said, unprompted, "You see things differently than anyone I've worked with." Money, $2,812. The list was short, but every item on it was mine. Fully, inarguably mine, acquired without anyone's permission and unable to be taken back by anyone's signature. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went to bed. The first cancellation came on a Tuesday. An email, polite and brief. "Hi, Brittany. We've decided to go in a different direction for the project. Thank you for your time." No explanation, no feedback. I wrote back with equal politeness, thanked them, and moved on. These things happen in freelance work. Projects fall through, budgets change, people change their minds. The second cancellation came 4 days later, and this one was different. Sandra Holt was a woman in her mid-50s who had contacted me 3 weeks before the family meeting about redesigning her living room. We had spoken twice on the phone. Long calls, the kind where a client is clearly excited and keeps thinking of things to add. She had emailed me reference photos. We had a site visit scheduled for the following Wednesday. She called, rather than emailing to cancel. "I just feel like it might not be the right time," she said. Her voice was careful, too careful, the voice of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and is now executing it. "We've heard you might be going through some personal things. We just want to work with someone who is fully available." I kept my voice even. "Can I ask who you heard that from?" A pause. "I'd rather not say. I'm sorry, Brittany. I hope things improve for you." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. Personal things. That phrasing, the careful vagueness of it, not a rumor that could be pinned down, not a specific accusation, just a suggestion of instability dropped into the word things and left for the listener to furnish with whatever their imagination provided. I told myself I was being paranoid. 2 cancellations in 2 weeks was not a pattern. It was a difficult month. I took a smaller job, a color consultation for a couple in Warwick, $200, and I picked up a living room project for a landlord refreshing a rental unit. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights that week, not for romantic reasons, but because a box of cereal lasts 4 days and costs $3.49. This is what the bottom actually looks like. If you've never been there, it's not dramatic. There are no grand gestures of despair. There is just the specific mathematics of scarcity. Splitting a box of pasta into 3 meals and calling it meal planning, calculating whether you can afford to replace the pen that ran out of ink or whether you should finish the week writing in pencil. I called Uncle Dennis in the 3rd week. He was the gentler of the 2 Walker brothers, the one who had once told me, during a family Christmas when I was 16, that my eye for putting things together reminded him of their mother, the one who had taught me to drive on the back roads of Connecticut the summer I was 14. He answered on the 2nd ring, "Brittany." His voice was warm, but underneath it something else, an apology waiting to be delivered. "Uncle Dennis, I just wanted to, honey, I love you. You know that." He exhaled slowly. "But I can't get in the middle of this. I'm sorry. I really am." He hung up gently. I stood in my kitchen for a moment after the call ended, looking at nothing in particular. There was no middle. There was the Walker family and there was me. 2 separate countries now, sharing only a name. 3 weeks after the family meeting, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The sender was listed as R. Kavanaugh. The subject line was "Design Consultation, Hartford Penthouse, Urgent Timeline." The body of the email was short. "Ms. Walker, I came across your portfolio on Who's last week and was impressed by your work on the Cranston apartment project. I am looking for a designer for a significant renovation in Hartford. Budget is substantial. Please call at your convenience." A phone number followed, a real area code, Hartford, Connecticut. I almost deleted it. The combination of urgent timeline and substantial budget from an unknown sender had the texture of something too good to be true, the kind of email that arrives when you are most desperate and exploits exactly that desperation. I didn't delete it. I looked up the phone number. I searched the name. Rose Kavanaugh had a LinkedIn profile, CEO of a small logistics company based in Hartford, 12 years in operation, 42 employees listed. A professional headshot that looked like it had been taken for actual business use, not stock photography. A profile that had the specific texture of something real. I called the number the next morning. She answered on the second ring. Rose Kavanaugh. Her voice was direct without being curt. The voice of someone who has spent enough years running her own company that she no longer performs warmth she doesn't feel, but also no longer performs hardness she doesn't need. This is Brittany Walker. You emailed me about a design consultation. Yes. A brief pause, not hesitation, just the pause of someone who is giving you their full attention. I saw your work on the Cranston project, the way you handled the light in that north-facing living room. I've talked to 2 other designers about this penthouse, and neither of them addressed the light problem. I'm wondering if you can come take a look. What's the light problem? Come see for yourself and tell me. I was quiet for a moment, then, when? Thursday works for me, if it works for you. Thursday was 2 days away. I had a color consultation in the afternoon and nothing else. Thursday works, I said. I hung up the phone and stood at my window, looking out at the October street below. The trees were fully turned now, brilliant and brief, the way things are when they are about to let go. Something was shifting. I couldn't name it yet, but something was shifting. Before Thursday came, the truth found me. It was a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the family meeting. I was at a coffee shop on Hope Street in Providence, reviewing sketches for the rental unit project, the only substantial work I had, when a woman approached my table. Diane Holloway. I had redesigned her home office the previous year, a small project, $1,400, but one I had been particularly proud of because I had solved a real problem. Her home office faced west and was unusable by afternoon because of the glare. I had repositioned the desk, added layered window treatment, and rearranged the lighting so the room was functional at any hour. She had sent me a handwritten thank you note afterward. That note was still on my refrigerator. Brittany, and she stopped at my table, and her face wore an expression I had to work to read. Half guilt, half something that looked like reluctant courage. I thought that was you. Do you mind if I sit for a minute? Of course not. She sat. She stirred her coffee slowly before she spoke. I have to ask you something directly, and I'm sorry if this is uncomfortable. She looked up. Is your sister Zendaya Walker? Yes. Diane nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. She called me about 6 weeks ago. The coffee shop noise continued around us. The hiss of the espresso machine, 2 women laughing at the table by the window, someone's music bleeding through earphones. Everything proceeding normally, while something very still happened at our table. She didn't call to ask about my experience working with you, Diane continued carefully. She called to tell me you had stepped back from your business. She said your family was managing some difficulties and that you might not be reliable right now. She left it open. She didn't say anything specific, just enough to make it sound serious. Like there was a legal issue maybe, something she couldn't get into. I set down my coffee cup. My hands were steady, but underneath the steadiness, something cold was moving. She said that. She was very calm about it, very concerned sounding. That's what made it convincing. Diane looked at me directly. I want you to know I didn't believe it. Not fully, but I also didn't call you to tell you, and I should have. A colleague of mine, she's in real estate, she was at a dinner party 2 weeks ago. She heard something similar. Brittany, whatever your sister is saying, it's traveling. I thanked Diane. I sat at that table after she left and I finished my coffee. She hadn't used dinner parties or large gatherings to spread this. She was too careful for that. She was calling people directly, individually. Using her professional credibility, I'm Zendaya Walker, CPA. I know this woman's family situation, to lend weight to insinuations she never had to put in writing. No fingerprints, just whispers, delivered one phone call at a time. I sat with this for a long time. Zendaya had not just taken the $3.8 million. She had looked at what I was building with the $950 and the secondhand camera and the YouTube tutorials, and she had decided to make sure I couldn't build it. I did not call her. I did not call my parents. I did not do anything that afternoon that came from the hot, reactive place where rage lives. Instead, I went home. I opened my email. I read the message from Rose Kavanaugh again, and I started preparing for Thursday. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and I thought carefully about what I knew and what I could do. What I knew, Zendaya was making phone calls. She was not putting anything in writing. She was smart enough for that. The damage was real but unprovable. I had no documentation. I had no resources for legal action. I had $2,600 in my checking account and a freelance business that was bleeding clients I couldn't afford to lose. What I could do, I could confront her. I could call my parents. I could write letters, make accusations, spend my limited energy on a fight I had no leverage to win and that would almost certainly end with me looking unstable. Exactly what she was already suggesting I was. Or I could build something she couldn't reach, not from defiance, not from the hot-throated desire to prove her wrong, because that kind of motivation burns itself out and leaves you hollow, but from something simpler and more durable, the understanding that the best response to someone who is trying to make you disappear is to become impossible to ignore. I closed the legal pad. I thought about Thursday, about Rose Kavanaugh, about a penthouse in Hartford and a light problem nobody else had bothered to identify. I thought about the notebook on my kitchen counter, open to the page about warm undertones in north-facing rooms. I thought about the list I had written on the kitchen floor the night of the family meeting. The short list. The one that was entirely mine. I pulled out my phone and confirmed the Thursday appointment. Then I made one more decision. If Zendaya was going to tell people I was stepping back from my business, I was going to build that business into something so visible, so undeniable, that eventually the truth would simply outweigh the lie. Not a confrontation, a construction project. I went to bed that night with something I hadn't felt in 6 weeks. Not hope, exactly. Hope felt too fragile for what I needed, but direction. The specific clarity that arrives when you stop trying to manage what other people are doing and commit entirely to what you can do yourself. The window beside my bed was open slightly. October air, cold and clean. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. Thursday, Hartford. A light problem nobody else had bothered to solve. That was enough to start. And that, the decision made on a kitchen floor and the appointment kept on a Thursday morning, is where the next part of my story begins. But before I go on, I want you to know something. If you are sitting somewhere right now in the aftermath of being told, by the people who should have believed in you, that you are not enough, I see you. Stay with me. Because what happened next is the part of the story that matters most. The building was on the 16th floor of a mid-rise on Asylum Avenue in Hartford, and when Rose Kavanaugh opened the door and stepped back to let me in, my first thought was not about the damage. My first thought was about the light. The previous tenant had gutted the kitchen, stripped it down to drywall, left exposed pipes running along the north wall like the building had been opened and not quite closed again. 2 interior walls had been partially demolished and abandoned mid-project. The floors were raw concrete in some rooms, plywood subfloor in others where tile had been torn up and never replaced. It looked objectively like a disaster, but the windows. The penthouse had windows on 3 sides, east, north, and west, and on a Thursday morning in late October, with the Hartford skyline sitting low and gray outside, the light that came through those windows was extraordinary. Not in spite of the emptiness of the space, but because of it. Without furniture, without walls blocking the sightlines, the light moved through the entire apartment in long, uninterrupted bands that shifted and changed as the clouds moved outside. The east windows caught the morning sun and threw it all the way to the west wall. The north windows held a cool, steady, even glow that didn't waver. A north-facing kitchen in this space would be flooded with the best cooking light imaginable. Natural, consistent, no harsh shadows, no glare. Every designer who had been here before me had looked at this apartment and seen the damaged walls, the missing kitchen, the unfinished floors. I understood that because those things were genuinely there and genuinely problematic. But the light was also genuinely there. And if you started with the light, if you designed around what the space was already doing right instead of fighting to correct what was wrong, you would end up with something remarkable. I walked the apartment for 35 minutes without saying a word. Rose Kavanaugh stood near the door and watched me. She did not follow me from room to room. She did not ask what I was thinking. She did not fill the silence with questions or suggestions or the kind of nervous chatter that clients sometimes use when they mistake quietness for disengagement. She just watched and waited. When I came back to where she was standing, she had her arms crossed and a look on her face that I would come to know well over the following months. The look of a woman who has spent 30 years running her own company and has developed a very precise radar for when someone is actually working versus when they are performing work. The kitchen should be on the north wall, I said, not the east wall where the previous owner had it. The east wall gets direct morning sun. It'll be in your face while you cook breakfast, and it'll heat the space unevenly in summer. The north wall gets consistent indirect light all day. You'll see the park instead of the building next door, and you'll never have to cook with sunglasses on. Rose was quiet for a moment. The other two designers both told me to put the kitchen back where it was, she said. They said rebuilding in a new location would cost too much. It costs more up front, I said, but you're going to live in this apartment for a long time. The cost of getting the light wrong is 20 years of a kitchen that never feels quite right, and you can't figure out why. She looked at me steadily. How long would the project take? 6 months if we don't change plans mid-project. Budget? I had done preliminary calculations the night before, based on comparable Hartford renovation projects I'd researched and the square footage of the space. I gave her a realistic range, not padded, not lowballed to win the job, and revised upward later, between $80,000 and $95,000, depending on material selections. I can work within that range, and I'll tell you every time a decision is going to push us toward the upper end. Rose nodded once. Not enthusiastically. She wasn't an enthusiastic person in that performative way that can mean very little. She nodded the way someone nods when they have made a decision. I don't pay the full fee up front, she said. I do thirds. 1/3 to begin, 1/3 at the halfway milestone, 1/3 at completion. If I'm not satisfied with the milestone work, we renegotiate before moving forward. Is that acceptable? That's acceptable. And I want weekly updates, not long. Just what happened this week, what's happening next week, and if there's anything I need to decide. I can do that. Good. She extended her hand. Let's start with the concept drawings. I want to see the north wall kitchen on paper before we go any further. I shook her hand. It was the firmest handshake I had received in 6 weeks. It felt disproportionately like something solid after a long time of standing on uncertain ground. I want to tell you about those 6 months honestly, without the soft focus that stories sometimes apply to periods of hard work in retrospect. It was not romantic. It was not a montage. It was long days that started at 6 in the morning when I reviewed the day's tasks before the sun was fully up, and ended some nights at 11 when I was cross-referencing supplier invoices at my kitchen table with a cold cup of tea beside me. It was the specific, unglamorous work of learning things I didn't know by doing them wrong first and correcting the error before it compounded. In the 3rd week, the tile supplier delivered the wrong grout color for the bathroom floor, a warm beige instead of the cool white I had specified. I caught it before the tile setter began work. The correction cost 2 days and some strained professional diplomacy, but it saved Rose $4,000 in rework. I noted it in my weekly update without drama, and Rose wrote back, "Good catch. This is what I'm paying for." That note went into a folder I kept, not because I needed validation. I had stopped needing that particular thing somewhere around week 4 when the work itself became the thing that mattered, but because I was learning to document everything, every decision, every deviation, every problem identified and solved. The folder was professional discipline, not sentiment. In the 2nd month, there was a harder moment. The contractor I had hired for the kitchen build-out, a man named Gary who came highly recommended and delivered on that recommendation for the first 6 weeks, made a unilateral decision in my absence to frame the island at a width I hadn't approved. Not dramatically wrong, 2 inches narrower than specified, but 2 inches that would make the kitchen feel cramped in a way that would be perceptible every single day to a person who cooked in it. I drove to Hartford on a Wednesday morning and stood in the space and measured. Then I called Gary. "It needs to come out," I said. "The island needs to be rebuilt at the specified width." He pushed back. It was subtle at first, explaining why the adjustment made structural sense, why the difference was minimal, why starting over would cost time we didn't have. All of it delivered with the specific confidence of someone who is accustomed to designers, particularly young women designers, accepting adjustments they didn't request. I let him finish. "I hear what you're saying," I said, "and I'm telling you it needs to come out." I specified that width for a reason. 2 inches in a galley kitchen is not a minimal difference. It's the difference between a kitchen that works and one that doesn't. I'll tell Rose we need 3 extra days. You rebuild at spec. A pause. It's going to cost more. I know. I'll absorb the additional labor cost from my fee. The rebuild happens. Another pause. Then, okay. And I drove back to Providence that afternoon and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a few minutes before going inside. I had just voluntarily reduced my own fee to correct a mistake that was not technically mine. I had done it because the alternative, a kitchen 2 inches too narrow, installed to save time and money, lived in by Rose Kavanaugh for the next 20 years, was not something I was willing to put my name on. That was the day I understood something about the kind of designer I was going to be. When the project was complete in the early weeks of spring, Rose walked through the finished apartment slowly. She started in the entryway, moved through the living area, stood in the kitchen for a long time. She opened the cabinet above the refrigerator. She ran her hand along the countertop edge. She stood at the north wall windows and looked out at the park. I stood near the door and waited. She turned around after a long time. "I have a colleague," she said, "Patricia Morse. She's been trying to find a designer for her home in Simsbury for 8 months. She's interviewed 4 people and none of them were right." She paused. "I'm going to call her tonight and tell her to call you. What I tell her is what I observed. You solve the problem the space is actually having, you manage money honestly, and you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. The introduction is mine. What happens after that is yours." I thanked her. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just do the same work." Patricia Morse was the first of 3 referrals from Rose. The second was a contractor looking for a design partner on a series of small commercial renovations. The third was Eleanor Voss. I want to tell you about Eleanor carefully, because she is important to this story in ways that go beyond what appeared on the surface of our professional relationship. Eleanor Voss was 64 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that comes not from affectation, but from decades of walking into rooms where people underestimated her and deciding each time to let them. She owned 7 commercial properties across Connecticut and Western Massachusetts, a portfolio she had built over 35 years, starting with a single 2-story building in New Haven that everyone in her circle told her was a mistake. She was not looking for an interior designer when Rose mentioned my name to her. She was looking for someone who could help her see the potential in a property she had recently acquired, a 4-story commercial building in New Haven built in the 1940s, vacant for 3 years, condemned by the city the previous spring. Most people look at it and see the problems, Rose told me when she called to introduce the connection. Eleanor sees something else. She wants to know if you can see it too. And we met at the building on a Tuesday morning in early April. The city had not yet turned green. The trees were still in that tentative early spring state, the buds there but not yet committed, and the building sat on its block with the particular heaviness of a structure that has been given up on. Eleanor was already inside when I arrived. She had a flashlight. She handed me one without comment. We walked the building together for nearly an hour. The first floor had water damage along the east wall and a ceiling that had partially collapsed near the back. The second and third floors were a series of small offices, their walls covered in the layered paint of decades of tenants, the floors hidden under carpet that had absorbed years of whatever buildings absorb when they are used and then abandoned. The 4th floor stopped me. The ceiling on the 4th floor was 4.2 meters high. In a building of this era, this size, in this neighborhood, that was extraordinary. The kind of architectural accident or decision made by someone long dead that most renovation projects buried under drop ceilings because it was cheaper and easier than working with the height. I stood in the middle of the 4th floor with my flashlight pointed upward and turned slowly in a circle. "Everyone tells me to drop the ceiling," Eleanor said from behind me. "I know," I said. "Don't." She was quiet. "This floor is worth more than the other 3 combined, if you use it right. The height is the asset. A photography studio, a high-end event space, an artist studio with gallery space, any of those would pay premium rent for this ceiling. You'd be renting height as much as square footage." Eleanor turned off her flashlight. She stood in the dim, natural light coming through the 4th floor windows and looked at me with an expression that I would later come to recognize as her version of approval. Not warm, not effusive, just a quiet recalibration upward. "Sit down with me for a few minutes," she said. We sat on the floor. There was nowhere else to sit. And she asked me questions, not about my portfolio or my rates or my process. She asked me how I thought about a space, what I looked for first, how I decided what to keep and what to remove. I answered honestly. I talked about light first, always light, because light is the thing you cannot add after the fact. You can add anything else, furniture, color, texture, but if the light is wrong, the room will never be right. I talked about the relationship between ceiling height and human scale, about how a room that makes you feel small or large affects how you behave in it without you ever consciously noticing. I talked about the 4th floor ceiling and what it would feel like to stand under it as a photographer setting up a shoot, the specific freedom of vertical space. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to ask you to do a feasibility study. I want a document. Thorough, realistic, no optimism for its own sake. That tells me what this building could become, what it would cost, and what the return on investment looks like across a 5-year horizon. I'll pay you $4,500 for the study. If the study convinces me, we talk about what comes next." "That's a fair arrangement," I said. "It's not charity," she said, and the way she said it was not unkind. It was simply clear. "I don't invest in people who need saving. I invest in people who need a door. If your study is good, that's the door." I nodded. She stood up and dusted off her hands. "One more thing." She paused. "Walker. Is your father Clint Walker, the attorney?" I felt something shift in my chest, a small, involuntary tightening. "Yes." Eleanor nodded slowly, not with warmth, not with coldness. With the careful neutrality of someone setting a fact aside so it doesn't interfere with what comes next. "He advised me on a transaction about 25 years ago. He told me that small commercial real estate in New England had no long-term upside, that I should liquidate and put the money in managed funds." She looked at me steadily. I ended the retainer the following week. The building I was asking him about tripled in value over the next decade. I did not speak. "I want you to know that I did not know who your father was when Rose mentioned your name. I looked up your portfolio before this meeting, and I came here because of what I saw in your work. The connection to your father is," she paused, choosing the word, "incidental. I mention it only because I think you should know and because I believe you deserve to make decisions with complete information." She looked at me with something I would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't kinship. It was something more like recognition. The look of a person who has seen a particular kind of story before, who has lived a version of it, and who understands without needing it, explained what it cost to be dismissed by someone whose opinion you once needed. "The study," she said. 3 weeks? 3 weeks, I said. I worked on the study for 22 days. I pulled building permits and zoning records. I researched comparable commercial renovations in the New Haven area, what they had cost, what rents the resulting spaces had commanded, how long they had taken to reach full occupancy. I consulted with a structural engineer, paying for 2 hours of her time out of my own pocket because the study needed to be credible, and credibility has a cost. I looked at the 4th floor from every angle I could find. The study was 31 pages. It included a phased renovation plan, 1st floor commercial retail, 2nd and 3rd floor co-working offices, 4th floor premium studio space, with cost estimates for each phase, revenue projections by tenant type, and a sensitivity analysis showing how the numbers changed if occupancy ran lower than projected. I did not round up on the projections. I did not smooth over the uncertainties. Where I didn't know something, I said so and explained how I had handled the gap. Eleanor read it over a weekend. On Monday morning, she called me. "The 4th floor section is the best part," she said, "but the whole thing is honest. That's rarer than you'd think." She paused. "I want to talk about a joint venture. The building is mine. The renovation is yours to design and manage. I cover the hard costs. You take a design fee plus 8% of the value increase at the end of a 5-year hold or at sale, whichever comes first. Everything in writing, everything documented, every major decision requires both of us." I wrote down the terms on the legal pad beside my phone. "I'll have a lawyer review the agreement before I sign," I said. "Good," she said. "So will I. I'd be worried if you didn't." This was how I met Nathan Briggs, not through a coincidence, not through a lucky encounter at a coffee shop, but through the deliberate, careful process of a serious business transaction. Eleanor's attorney knew him professionally and suggested him as someone who handled small commercial real estate agreements in Connecticut and Rhode Island. I called his office, described what I needed, and he took the call. He was thorough, clear, and reasonably priced. He found 2 clauses in Eleanor's initial draft that needed adjustment. I liked him because he explained the problems in plain language and didn't make me feel foolish for not having caught them myself. I signed the agreement with Eleanor on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room at her attorney's office. It was the first contract I had ever signed where both parties had equal standing, where I was not the vendor being hired, but the partner being trusted. I drove home afterward and sat in my apartment and looked at the signed copy on my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about the list I had made on the kitchen floor 7 months earlier, the short list, the one that was mine. I added a line to it now, in my head, a partner who operates with integrity and expects the same in return. It was a short addition, but it changed the list entirely. I filed the paperwork for my LLC in May, 10 months after the family meeting. I chose the name carefully, the way you choose a name for something you intend to build a life around. Aldermore, combining alder, the tree that grows in wet ground and is known for the strength of its root system, with more, the kind of open landscape that looks bare until you understand how much is living just beneath the surface. No walker anywhere. That was deliberate. Aldermore Design, LLC, was registered in Connecticut and Rhode Island. I opened a business checking account. I hired a bookkeeper on a part-time basis, a woman named Carol Reyes, 52 years old, who had spent 15 years as the office manager for a small construction firm and had the particular competence of someone who has spent years making sure other people's numbers were right. "What are your billing terms?" she asked at our first meeting before she agreed to work with me. 30 days net. And if a client is late, I've been too flexible about that. "You'll be less flexible going forward," she said in a tone that was not a question. "I'll draft a late payment clause for your contracts." I hired her on the spot. The New Haven building project began in June. Eleanor and I established a communication rhythm. Tuesday morning calls, 15 minutes, covering what had happened and what was coming. Any decision over $5,000 required a conversation before action. Any problem I caught before it became expensive got noted in the running project log that Carol helped me set up. The project took 8 months. First floor, the water damage was more extensive than the initial assessment had suggested. We brought in a remediation specialist, added 6 weeks to that phase, and revised the cost estimate upward by $11,000. Eleanor and I had the $5,000 conversation and agreed to proceed. I noted it in the log. Second and third floors. The small offices came down. The floor plan opened into flexible co-working space, the kind that could be partitioned or opened depending on tenant needs, with natural light from the windows that the original layout had blocked with unnecessary interior walls. Fourth floor. We kept the ceiling exactly as we found it. We added a skylight on the north-facing slope of the roof, a decision that cost $8,000 and that Eleanor approved after I sent her 3 comparable projects where similar skylights had increased rental rates by an average of 22%. The wooden floors on the fourth floor were original. Under the grime, they were in remarkable condition, a wide plank oak that turned out to be over 100 years old. We refinished them. We added nothing else except light fixtures and clean white walls. When the building was complete in the early spring of the following year, Eleanor and I walked it together on a Sunday morning. The first floor was already leased to an independent gallery. The second and third floors had 2 confirmed co-working tenants. The fourth floor we walked last. Eleanor stood in the center of the fourth floor and looked up at the ceiling. Light came through the new skylight in a long shaft and lay across the original oak floor. "The photographer who toured this last Tuesday offered above the asking rate," she said. I didn't say anything. "The building's current estimated value is up 58% from acquisition." She looked at me. "Your 8% of that increase is approximately $34,000. I had known the number was coming. I had run the calculation the week before. But hearing it said aloud in this room, in this building that had been condemned 18 months ago, felt different from seeing it on a spreadsheet. "That's the first time I've ever had meaningful savings," I said. Eleanor looked at me for a moment. Then she said something I didn't fully understand until much later. "That's the first time. It won't be the last." 16 months after the family meeting, Aldermore Design had completed its 8th project. Carol kept a running portfolio summary on a shared document that I reviewed every Sunday evening. Not obsessively, but as a discipline. The way you check the foundation of a house you're building to make sure everything is level before you go higher. 8 projects. Annual revenue approaching $280,000. 2 part-time employees. A real client list with real referrals, with real completed work that could be photographed and documented and shown. The work was real. The growth was real. But something else was also real, and I had been aware of it for months without knowing quite what to do about it. Projects were occasionally going quiet at the wrong time. A restaurant owner in New Haven named Kevin Marsh had been enthusiastic across 3 conversations and then simply stopped responding. A referral from one of Eleanor's contacts had turned into a warm call that turned into nothing. No explanation, no polite decline, just silence. The pattern was subtle. It was not consistent enough to be certain. But I had learned, over 16 months of running a small business, to pay attention to patterns. I called Diane Holloway. She hadn't heard anything recently, but she said she would keep her ears open. A week later, she called back. "I was at a networking lunch yesterday," she said. "Someone mentioned your company name, Aldermore. They said it right. They'd heard from someone in Hartford that there was a designer in the New Haven area with a complicated family situation and unresolved financial issues. Nobody seemed to know exactly where the information came from. It was just there." I sat very still. "Brittany, whoever is saying this knows the name Aldermore. They've been paying attention to you." I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time after that call. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle. It was late October again, a full year after the family meeting, and the light had that particular autumn quality of being golden and slightly diminished at the same time. Zendaya was not making phone calls anymore, or not only phone calls. She was talking in professional circles, carefully, with plausible deniability in the way that she had always been careful. But she knew the name Aldermore. She had been tracking me closely enough to know that I had changed my company name. That meant she was worried, and that meant I was doing something right. The discovery happened the way most important things happen in real life. Not dramatically, not with a single moment of revelation, but through the slow accumulation of careful, unglamorous work. Nathan Briggs was completing due diligence for the Westport land parcel, a property that Eleanor had flagged as a potential acquisition adjacent to a residential area in Fairfield County, suitable for a small mixed-use development. Routine paperwork, title searches, lien checks, correspondence review on neighboring properties. In a chain of emails between a Hartford area commercial brokerage and a property management group in New Haven, Nathan found something that was not routine: an email from Zendaya Walker, sent from her company email address, the firm where she worked as a senior CPA, to a commercial broker named Paul Erickson. Sent 11 months earlier, which meant approximately 5 months after the family meeting, approximately 4 months after Aldermore Design, LLC, was officially registered. She knew the company name. She had been tracking me. The subject line was, "Heads Up, Confidential." The content was measured and precise, the way Zendaya did everything. She introduced herself as having a family connection to Brittany Walker. She noted that Brittany had a history of financial mismanagement and that the family had been required to intervene on a legal basis. She advised Paul Erickson to exercise caution regarding any business proposals originating from Aldermore Design or from Brittany Walker personally. She did not say anything that was technically a specific factual claim. She implied, she suggested, she framed. She let the professional weight of her own credentials, a senior CPA at a reputable firm, writing from a company email address using the language of careful professional concern, do the work of making her insinuations credible. There were 2 more emails in the chain, different recipients, the same careful, devastating construction. Nathan called me on a Thursday afternoon. "I need to show you something," he said. "I want to send it to your email before we talk so you can read it before we discuss it." "Are you somewhere private?" "Yes." The email arrived. I opened the attachment. I read it. Then I read it again. I set the phone down on my desk. Not hung up, just set down, and I sat with it for a full minute. Outside my window, the October street was ordinary. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, 2 kids on bikes, everything proceeding normally. I picked up the phone. "How strong is this?" I asked. "As a basis for a cease and desist, very strong. As a basis for a full tortious interference lawsuit, we'd need to demonstrate specific economic harm, which we could argue, but it would require more documentation and more time and money than the cease and desist." "Start with the cease and desist." "Are you sure? We can take time to—" "I'm sure," I said. "But Nathan, I want to be clear about something. I'm not doing this from anger. I'm doing this because she needs to stop, and this is the way to make her stop. There's a difference." A pause. "I understand. Draft it. Make it thorough, make it specific, and make it absolutely clear what happens if she continues." "I'll have a draft to you by Monday." I hung up. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the folder I had labeled Z the previous year. The one I had started with Zendaya's 2 carefully constructed emails after the family meeting, back when I had nothing more than an instinct and the discipline to document in advance of certainty. I added a new document to it. Then I closed the drawer, and I went back to work. Nathan's draft arrived on Monday morning. It was 5 pages, precise and careful, the work of someone who understood that legal documents are most powerful when they are most specific. It named 3 instances of professional defamation with documentation attached. It cited the relevant Connecticut statutes on tortious interference with business relations. It noted the professional context, that the communications had been sent from a company email address using professional credentials to individuals in a business capacity, and what that meant for liability. It ended with one clear sentence. If Zendaya Walker continues to disseminate false or misleading information regarding Brittany Walker or Aldermore Design, LLC, legal proceedings will be initiated without further notice. I read it twice. I suggested 2 small adjustments. 1 clarification of timeline, 1 addition of a specific deal that I could document as having been affected. Nathan incorporated both. I approved it on Wednesday. It was sent via certified mail to Zendaya's office at her firm in Stamford, addressed to her by name, professional, formal, impossible to misread. Delivery confirmation, Thursday, 10:19 in the morning. By 10:44, Nathan received a call from Zendaya's personal attorney, not Zendaya herself, her attorney. The fact that she had a personal attorney prepared to respond within 25 minutes told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she had taken the risk she was running. The attorney was formal and measured. He did not acknowledge wrongdoing. He said his client had received the letter and was reviewing it. He asked whether we were open to a conversation. Nathan called me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Tell him there's nothing to discuss. The letter says what it says. If she stops, nothing further happens. If she doesn't, we proceed. Nathan delivered that message. There was no further communication from Zendaya's attorney. What happened instead, I learned later through a combination of Nathan's professional contacts in the Connecticut legal community and the careful grapevine that exists in any small enough professional world. The certified mail had been processed by a legal secretary at Zendaya's firm. The cover sheet, as per standard firm protocol, had been reviewed by a managing partner before being passed to the named recipient. Within a week, 2 senior associates at the firm knew that Zendaya Walker had used her company email address to send communications that were now the subject of a cease and desist letter from a Connecticut attorney. Within 2 weeks, the managing partner had a conversation with Zendaya behind a closed door. She was not fired. That is not how these things work in large professional services firms, where the public management of internal problems is itself a legal consideration. Instead, she was reassigned, moved from client-facing commercial transactions, the work that had built her reputation, the networking events and client lunches and professional visibility, to an internal compliance review role, a windowless office, no client contact, no professional events. In the world Zendaya had built her identity around, this was not a minor adjustment. It was the quiet, permanent kind of consequence that arrives not with a dramatic moment, but with the slow realization that the room you used to walk into with confidence is no longer one you will be invited back to. I did not celebrate this. There was nothing to celebrate in watching someone dismantle their own career with choices they made freely. But I will tell you what I felt, sitting at my desk in New Haven on the Thursday afternoon when Nathan told me what had happened. Something loosened. Some small, tightly held thing that I had been carrying without fully acknowledging loosened and was set down. Not victory. Something quieter than that. The knowledge that the ground had been cleared. The 12 months that followed were the first 12 months in which I was building without a counterforce working against me. I want to be careful about how I tell this part, because I have seen enough stories like mine be reduced to a single climactic number. A portfolio value, a revenue figure, a headline. And I know how false that reduction is. The numbers are real, but they are not the story. The story is this. I hired a full-time project manager named Lisa Park. She was 38 years old, had spent the previous decade managing commercial construction projects for a mid-size contractor, and had recently decided she wanted to move to the design side of the industry. Eleanor mentioned her name to me in passing. I called Lisa, we had coffee, and within an hour of conversation, I understood that she thought about spaces and timelines and problems the way I did, systematically, without panic, with a preference for solving things early rather than explaining them later. I offered her the job at the end of that coffee. She negotiated her salary upward by 8% before accepting. I respected that. With Lisa handling project management on the day-to-day level, I could do the thing I was actually best at, the design work itself, and the client relationships that generated the next project. I stopped being someone who was doing everything and became someone who was leading a small team doing everything together. By the end of that 12-month period, Aldermore Design had completed its 14th project. Our annual revenue had grown to $460,000. Real documented revenue from completed work, not projections. I had paid off the last of my student debt in August. I had a genuine savings account with 6 months of operating expenses. I had purchased, for the first time in my life, with money I had earned and saved without anyone's help, a second-hand but reliable car that didn't need the heat run for 10 minutes before it was warm. Eleanor and I were evaluating a new acquisition, a mixed-use parcel in Westport, Connecticut. I knew what Westport meant. It was 20 minutes from the house on Greenfield Lane in Greenwich. From the gallery wall with 3 silver frame photographs of Zendaya and no photographs of me. Eleanor mentioned it to me over dinner at her farmhouse in February. Roast chicken, a bottle of good red wine she opened for no particular occasion, her cat asleep in the armchair by the fire. "There is a parcel in Westport," she said, in the same tone she used to discuss all business, clear, direct, without drama. "Good location, undervalued, mixed-use potential. I know what the geography means to you." I was quiet for a moment. "Send me the listing," I said. She did not make a larger moment of it than it was. That was one of the things I had come to value most about Eleanor Voss. She did not need the dramatic version of things. She understood that the quiet version was often the one that actually mattered. I reviewed the listing that week. The numbers made sense. The location made sense. And yes, I will be honest, there was something in me that wanted to put my name on something real and permanent in a place where the people who had said I was not enough would eventually have to drive past it. Not for revenge, for the record. The kind of record that doesn't require explanation, because it simply exists. Before any of that could happen, though, there was an evening I had been quietly dreading for months. The Connecticut Real Estate Association's annual charity gala. Eleanor had been invited. She had mentioned in passing that she planned to attend and that she would like me to come as her business partner. I had said I would think about it. I had been thinking about it ever since. The Hartford Marriott Ballroom had been dressed for winter. White orchids on every table. Candles in tall glass holders throwing soft gold light across the room. A string quartet in the far corner playing something classical that I recognized but couldn't name. The kind of event that costs a significant amount of money to make look effortless. Attended by people who understand that looking effortless is itself a form of professional communication. 180 guests, black tie. Every significant name in Connecticut commercial real estate, development, law, and finance gathered under one set of crystal chandeliers for an evening that was ostensibly about charity and was actually about visibility. I had stood in front of my bathroom mirror for 20 minutes before leaving my apartment, not because I couldn't decide what to wear. I had decided weeks ago, a simple black dress, no jewelry, hair straight and clean. But because I was having a conversation with myself that I needed to finish before I walked into that room. The conversation went like this. You do not need anything from them. You are not going there to prove something. You are going because Eleanor asked you to come as her partner, and you belong in that room as much as anyone who was sent an invitation. That is the only reason. Go in, be present, do the work of being visible without performing it, and come home. I had this conversation 3 times. Then I put on my coat and drove to Hartford. Eleanor was waiting in the lobby when I arrived. Silver earrings, a dark green dress, the steady, composed presence of a woman who has attended 30 years of events like this one and has long since stopped being impressed by chandeliers. She looked at me carefully when I walked in. Good, she said. Just that. Then she handed me a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne, water, because she had noticed months ago that I did not drink at professional events and had never made a thing of it. And we walked into the ballroom together. I saw them before they saw me. My father was standing near the bar on the far side of the room, deep in conversation with Gerald Ashton. Clint Walker, at 61, still carried himself like the most certain person in any room. Shoulders back, head slightly lifted, the posture of a man who has spent 4 decades being paid for his confidence. Gerald stood beside him with a glass of scotch, nodding at whatever my father was saying. My mother was seated at a round table near the center of the room, her pearls catching the candlelight, her back perfectly straight. Aunt Ruth was beside her. 3 other women I recognized from years of Walker family social events were arranged around the table in the comfortable configuration of people who have sat together many times before. And Zendaya. She was across the room, near the windows, standing in a group of 5 people in expensive suits. She was talking, animated, engaged, her hands moving slightly as she made a point. And she looked from a distance exactly like someone at the peak of their professional life. Confident, polished, entirely at home. 3 months had passed since the cease and desist. I knew, through Nathan's professional contacts, that she had been reassigned at her firm. I knew that the reassignment had consequences she was still navigating. But standing across a ballroom from her now, in the warm light of a winter gala, she looked like none of that had happened. People are good at looking like none of it happened. I had learned that about people. My chest tightened, a small, involuntary response that I noted without judgment. 2 years of silence and my nervous system still registered them as a warning. That was not weakness. That was just the body's honest accounting of history. Eleanor placed her hand briefly on my arm. "Breathe," she said quietly. I breathed. Then Eleanor turned and walked directly toward the table where Gerald Ashton was standing with my father. Not slowly, not quickly. The deliberate pace of a woman with somewhere to be. I walked with her. Gerald Ashton saw Eleanor first, and his face opened into the genuine warmth of someone recognizing an old professional colleague. "Eleanor, it's been too long." "Gerald." She shook his hand with the ease of long acquaintance. Then she turned, naturally, smoothly, in the way of someone making a social introduction at a professional event. Nothing staged about it, nothing performed. "Have you met my business partner, Brittany Walker, the creative force behind Aldermore Design?" She said it at a clear, caring volume. Not loud. Eleanor was never loud. Just the natural projection of a woman who has spent decades in rooms like this one and knows how sound travels. The tables nearest to us heard it. I saw, in my peripheral vision, 2 heads turn. Gerald Ashton's expression shifted through something complex. Recognition first. He knew my face. He had seen it across a dining room table when he slid a document toward me with tabs marking the signature lines. Then something else, harder to read. The recalibration of a man who has just been asked to hold 2 contradictory pieces of information at the same time. The file in which Brittany Walker signs away her inheritance, and the living person in front of him being introduced as the business partner of Eleanor Voss. "Brittany," he said. His voice was professionally neutral. "Good to see you." "Gerald." I shook his hand. My father turned from the bar. Clint Walker's face did something I had never seen it do before. In all the years I had been watching that face for signs of what it thought of me. It went completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his reaction. The involuntary stillness of a man whose processing has momentarily exceeded his ability to respond. He looked at me like I was something that should not be in the room and was unquestionably there. My mother appeared from somewhere to my left. Meryl Walker's recovery time has always been remarkable. It is one of the things I have genuinely admired about her, even when I was on the wrong side of it. Her expression shifted from surprise to warmth in the span of 2 seconds, a seamless transition that would have convinced anyone who didn't know her. "Brittany." She reached for my hand with both of hers. "What a surprise, sweetheart. We've been so worried about you." I let her take my hand. 1 moment, then I withdrew it, gently, without drama. "I appreciate that, Mom. I've been well." "You look wonderful." Her eyes moved to Eleanor with a careful, assessing warmth. "And you're working with Eleanor Voss. How did that come about?" "Good work," Eleanor said pleasantly, before I could answer. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray with the ease of someone who has handled social redirections for decades. Brittany's work speaks for itself. The New Haven building project got quite a bit of attention in the regional real estate community. Then Zendaya was there. I had not seen her cross the room. She appeared at the edge of our small circle with the smooth social navigation of someone who has spent years working events like this one, and she looked at me with an expression that I recognized, the chess player's look, assessing an unexpected move on the board, deciding in real time how to respond. She tilted her head slightly, a small, controlled smile. "Brittany, I heard you'd been doing some design work." A brief pause, precisely calibrated. "That's really sweet." The word landed exactly as she intended it, minimizing, affectionate in a way that was also dismissive. The tone you use with someone doing something admirable on a small scale, a child's lemonade stand, a hobby turned side project. Eleanor set down her champagne glass. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her expression. She simply turned towards Zendaya with the full, unhurried attention of a woman who has been underestimated by more formidable people than this and has learned to enjoy the correction. Aldermore Design manages a commercial portfolio currently valued at $4.2 million, she said. 14 completed projects across Connecticut and Rhode Island. I've been Brittany's business partner for the past 18 months. She paused, one beat, perfectly timed. I wouldn't call that sweet. I'd call it exceptional. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time in a quiet conversation at a professional event. A man seated at the nearby table, I would learn later that he was a development attorney from New Haven, set his scotch glass down slowly. 2 women behind us stopped their own conversation mid-sentence. Gerald Ashton looked at his drink. Zendaya's smile did not disappear. It froze, held in place by the considerable discipline of a woman who will not give anyone the satisfaction of watching it fail. But behind the smile, in her eyes, something recalculated. "That's impressive," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "Yes," said Eleanor, "it is." My father had not spoken. I glanced at him. He was looking at me, really looking at me, not past my shoulder, not at a neutral point in the middle distance, for what felt like the first time in my adult life. I did not look away. I held his gaze for a moment, steady and quiet, and then I turned back to the room. I had not come here for this. I had not staged this. I had walked through the door because I was invited and because I belonged here, and the rest of it had simply happened the way true things happen when you stop trying to manage them. Eleanor touched my arm lightly. "I see Harold Steele across the room," she said in a normal tone, as if the previous 4 seconds had been entirely ordinary. "Come say hello." We walked away. I did not look back. I was not there for the phone call. I learned the details afterward from Nathan, sitting across from me at his office in New Haven with a legal pad of notes between us. Here is what happened. The Westport land parcel required a standard boundary survey and title verification with the owners of adjacent properties. One of those adjacent properties was a residential estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The property owner of record, Clint and Merrill Walker. Their attorney of record, Gerald Ashton. Nathan made the call on a Tuesday morning 10 days after the gala. Professional, routine, the kind of call real estate attorneys make dozens of times a year. He identified the purchasing entity. Aldermore Design, LLC, he said. Owner and principal, Brittany Walker. The silence on the line was not a polite pause. Nathan told me later that it lasted long enough for him to check whether the call had dropped. Then Gerald Ashton's voice, very carefully. "Brittany Walker. The same Brittany Walker from the Walker family inheritance matter?" "That's correct." Another silence. Nathan said he could hear the sound of papers being moved on a desk. The specific sound of a man who needs to do something with his hands while his mind catches up to what he has just heard. "I'll need to conduct financial verification on the purchasing entity," Gerald said. "Standard compliance for boundary agreements of this type." "Of course," Nathan said. "I'll send a portfolio summary." He sent it that afternoon. Aldermore Design, LLC. Total combined value of business assets and real property holdings, $6.8 million. No Walker family capital anywhere in the company's financial history. No external investment beyond Eleanor Voss's original joint venture contribution, documented and repaid in full 18 months prior. Every dollar traceable to completed projects, retained earnings, and one commercial property acquisition. Built from nothing. In 2 years. Nathan told me that when he spoke to Gerald again the following day, there was something different in the older attorney's voice. Not warmth. Gerald Ashton was not a warm man. Something more precise than that. The specific quality in a person's voice when they are holding information that has forced them to revise a conclusion they had held with confidence for a long time. "I'll need to contact my client," Gerald said. "Of course," Nathan said. I was not in the room when Gerald Ashton called my father. I have never been in that room. What I know from the details that filtered back to me over the following weeks. From Uncle Dennis, who heard fragments from Dorothy. From Nathan, who heard things through professional channels. From the slow, incomplete way that truth travels in families that are not accustomed to telling it. But I want to tell you what I believe happened, because I think it matters. I think Gerald Ashton laid it out simply, the way he lays out everything, the facts in sequence, without editorial comment, the professional neutrality of a man who presents information and lets the client do the feeling. Adjacent parcel, Westport acquisition. Purchasing entity, Aldermore Design LLC. Owner, Brittany Walker. Portfolio valuation, $6.8 million. No family capital. No external backing beyond one documented joint venture, repaid in full. And I think my father sat in his study, the room with the bookshelves of law journals and the desk where he had spent 30 years being the most certain person in every room, and said something he had probably not said many times in his professional life. That's not possible. And I think Gerald very quietly confirmed that it was. I think my father looked at the wall where 3 photographs of Zendaya hung in silver frames. And I think he looked at the space beside them. The space that had been empty since the photographs of me came down, one by one, slowly enough that each individual absence could be explained as reorganization. I think something broke in that study. Not dramatically, not the way things break in movies, with a sound and a visible fracture. The way things break in real life, quietly, permanently, in a way that cannot be undone because the understanding that caused the break cannot be unfelt. His daughter had built $6.8 million of her own. Without him. Because of him. Both of those things were true at the same time. My mother was in the room. She had been listening on speaker from the armchair by the window, the armchair she always sat in when Clint took important calls. I think her hand tightened on the arm of the chair. I think her face did not move, because Meryl Walker's face very rarely moves when she is processing something she is not ready to show. And in the living room, I think Zendaya was on her phone, already making calls, her voice low and fast, asking questions about Aldermore Design that told anyone listening how much she had not known and how much she understood that not knowing had cost her. Gerald's last words to my father before he hung up. If you want to reach her, Richard, Clint, it goes through attorneys now. She has counsel. My father had made his daughter get a lawyer. I don't know exactly what that cost him to understand, but I know it cost him something. Some things you only understand when you hear them from someone else's mouth, spoken in the flat professional tone of a man who is telling you the consequence of a choice you made years ago without fully understanding what you were choosing. The letter arrived through Nathan's office on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the phone call between attorneys. It was not on legal letterhead. It was on personal stationery, cream paper, my father's name printed at the top in simple type, the address of the house on Greenfield Lane beneath it. His handwriting, which I had not seen in 2 years, was the same as I remembered. Precise, slightly compressed, the handwriting of a man who was trained to write clearly and quickly. Nathan scanned it and sent it to me. I printed it at home and read it at my kitchen table. Brittany, Gerald told me about Aldermore. He showed me the numbers. I want to be honest with you. My first response was that it wasn't possible. I sat with that for a long time, because I think what that response tells you about me is something I need to own rather than explain away. I am proud of what you have built. I know I don't have the right to claim pride in something I had no part in. That is not lost on me. But I am saying it anyway because not saying it would be worse. I would like to speak with you. I understand if that is not something you want. If you are willing, I would ask that we start simply. A conversation. Not about the estate, not about the legal matters, just a conversation. Your father, I read it twice at the table. Then I stood at the window and read it again. Then I sat on the floor, the same kitchen floor where I had made my list 2 years ago, the short list of what I still had, and I read it a 4th time. He was proud. Of course he was proud. There was a number attached to my name now, a number large enough to register on the scale by which Clint Walker measured the world, and the number had unlocked a feeling that the work itself, the notebooks, the color theory, the $950 projects, the discipline of learning a thing by doing it wrong and correcting the error, had never been allowed to unlock. I knew that. I sat with that knowing, and I let it be true without letting it be the whole truth. Because the other thing that was also true was this. He had written the letter. He had called it pride. He had said, I need to own rather than explain away. And that sentence, in the compressed, careful handwriting of a man not accustomed to that kind of admission, had cost him something real. Both things were true. I dictated my reply to Nathan the following Monday. He sent it through Gerald's office. Dad, thank you for writing. I'm not ready for a conversation yet. That's not a permanent answer. It's just the honest one right now. What I want you to know is this. I didn't build Aldermore to prove something to you. I built it because it was the only way I knew how to survive what happened. And then I kept building because I found out I was good at it and it was mine. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Brittany. The Westport property closed on a Thursday in late March. I signed the papers at a title company in Stamford, with Nathan beside me and Eleanor on the phone from Asheville where she was evaluating another property. The escrow agent was professional and efficient and had no idea what it meant to me to sign my name on that document. Not the relinquishment of inheritance rights, not the giving away of something, but the acquisition of something. The first real property I had ever owned. I drove to the site afterward. It was a flat parcel just over an acre with a view of a small pond on the eastern edge. The previous owner had used it for storage. There were concrete pads where prefab buildings had stood. Nothing beautiful about it yet. All potential. I stood there for a while in the March cold and thought about what I wanted it to become. Not a house for myself. That idea had occurred to me and passed quickly because the truth was that my apartment in New Haven had become, quietly, genuinely, the first place I had lived as an adult that felt like mine. I did not need a bigger home to feel the size of what I had built. The Westport parcel was not for living in. It was for building something that could hold other people while they built. I had been thinking about this for months. The thing I had needed most in those first months after the family meeting, the thing that no amount of determination or discipline or careful note-taking in a design notebook could substitute for, was a door, a physical space, at a price someone starting out could afford, in a professional environment that said you are serious and your work is serious without requiring the credentials or the capital that most serious spaces demanded. I wanted to build that space. I was working through the design plans with Lisa one afternoon in early April when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered on the third ring. Brittany. The voice was older, slightly breathless, as if the caller had walked further than expected to reach the phone. This is your grandmother, Dorothy Walker. I set down my pencil. Grandma Dorothy. I got your number from Dennis. I hope that's all right. A pause. She collected herself. I could hear it, the small adjustment in her breathing. I've been wanting to call for a long time. I didn't know how to begin. You just began, I said quietly. I saw something in the paper about a new design firm in New Haven, Aldermore. There was a photograph. Another pause. That was you. Yes. I want you to know something. Her voice was careful now, the way very old people are sometimes careful when they are saying a thing they have carried for a long time and do not want to say imprecisely. I was in the room that day, when they had that meeting, when you signed the papers. I know you were. I should have said something. I sat there and I said nothing, and I have not forgiven myself for that. She stopped. I'm not calling to ask for your forgiveness. I'm calling because I wanted you to hear me say it directly. What happened to you in that room was wrong. I knew it was wrong, and I sat in silence, and that was also wrong. The line was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Grandma Dorothy, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. That means more to me than you might realize. Can I come and see you? She asked. I'd like to see what you've built. The Westport parcel became, over the following 7 months, a low-rise building of modest ambition and serious purpose. I designed it simply. 12 studio spaces of varying sizes, a shared resource room with high-quality equipment available to all tenants, 2 small conference rooms bookable by the hour, a common area with good light and comfortable chairs, and a kitchen where people could eat lunch without feeling like they were in a break room. The rental rates were set at 30% below market. Tenants signed 3-month agreements with the option to continue month to month. No long commitments required from people who were still figuring out whether what they were building had legs. I called it the Aldermore Creative Hub. Lisa managed the construction. I designed it. Eleanor reviewed the financial model and told me it would run at a slight loss for the first 2 years, which I had already calculated, and that she thought it was worth doing anyway, which I had also already decided. The opening was on a Saturday in October, 2 years and 3 weeks after the family meeting on Greenfield Lane. I had not invited my family. I had invited clients, professional contacts, the first 4 tenants who had signed agreements, Nathan, Carol, Lisa, and Eleanor. Dorothy Walker arrived at 11 in the morning in a taxi without announcement using the address she had found in the local paper. I saw her from across the room and stood still for a moment. She was 83 years old and walked with a cane now. I had not known about the cane, had not seen her since the day of the family meeting. And she moved through the space slowly, looking at each room with an attentiveness that reminded me, unexpectedly, of the way I moved through a space when I was trying to understand it. She found me near the window of the main common area. She took my hand in both of hers. Her hands were small, cool, the skin thin in the way of very old hands that have touched a great many things. "It's lovely," she said simply. "He would have been proud." I knew she meant my grandfather Harvey. I started to say something, but she continued, "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She looked up at me. "The trust your grandfather set up, the Harvey Walker Family Trust that was transferred to Zendaya, your grandfather established it when you were 7 years old." I waited. "He told me once, when you were about that age, that you had a way of looking at things. He said you walked into a room and you saw what it could be, not what it was. He wanted the trust to go to you." She paused, and I heard everything that was held in that pause. "He died before the paperwork was finalized. The trust transferred according to general family terms, and your father made the decision about where it would go." The room continued around us. People talking, cups of coffee, the sound of the building being occupied for the first time. "Grandma Dorothy," I said carefully, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know that your grandfather saw you. A long time ago, before any of this, before you had built anything, he saw what you were." She squeezed my hands once. "I thought you should hear that." I stood in the building I had designed and built on the land I had purchased with money I had earned, and I felt something shift in a place I had not known was still waiting. Not vindication, not triumph, something older and quieter than either of those things. The understanding that I had been seen, truly seen for what I actually was, before I had anything to show for it. That the people who had dismissed me had been wrong not just about my future, but about my present, had been wrong from the beginning, had failed to see what an old man with failing health had seen in a 7-year-old girl who walked into rooms and imagined what they could become. I held Dorothy's hands for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for coming today." 3 weeks after the opening, on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang. Zendaya Walker. I looked at the screen. The first call in 2 years. I thought about what I wanted. Not what was right, not what was proportionate, but what I actually wanted. Then I answered. "Brittany." Her voice was different from what I remembered. The layer of performance that had always been present, the controlled warmth, the measured authority, was thinner than before. Not gone, but thinner. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," I said honestly. A pause. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for months." She stopped, started again. "I'm not going to tell you I had good reasons for what I did. I didn't. I had reasons. Fear, mostly, though I know that doesn't make it better, but not good ones." I listened without speaking. "I convinced myself that you were going to fail anyway, that the things I said to people were just accurate, that I was telling them something they'd eventually find out on their own." A long pause. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like what it was," I said. Not harshly, just clearly. "Yes." And she was quiet for a moment. "The cease and desist, I deserved it. More than that, probably." "Yes." Another silence. Outside my window, the New Haven street was quiet. A few lit windows in the building across the street, the distant sound of traffic. "I'm not asking you to come back," Zendaya said. "I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to hear me say that I know what I did, that I'm not going to do it again, and that I'm sorry." I thought about this for a long time, longer than the pause probably suggested. "I hear you," I said, "and I believe you mean it right now." "I do." "I forgive you," I said. I want to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't. It means I'm not carrying this anymore. It means I wish you well, genuinely. It does not mean that we go back to being what we were. It does not mean I trust you. It does not mean the door is open. I paused. "But I forgive you. That part is real." The silence on the line was different from the silences earlier in the call, heavier, somehow, more settled. "Okay," Zendaya said quietly. "Okay. Take care of yourself, Zendaya." You too. I ended the call, set the phone on my desk, sat for a long time in the quiet of my apartment. Something I had not realized I was still holding, set down, not with drama, not with ceremony, just set down. The way you put down something heavy when you finally reach the place you were going and there is no reason to keep carrying it. My mother called on a Saturday morning in November. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the second cup of coffee of the morning, reviewing a new project proposal, a mixed-use renovation in Bridgeport that Lisa had flagged as promising. The early winter light came through the window at a low angle and lay across the table in a long, pale rectangle. I saw her name on the screen and I answered, Meryl. I had stopped saying mom sometime in the past year without deciding to. It had simply changed. Brittany. Her voice carried the specific weight of a woman who has prepared what she is going to say. I want to talk to you. All right. You've proven yourself. She paused as if giving the statement space to be received. Everyone can see what you've accomplished. You don't have to keep doing this. You can come home. I looked out the window. November in New Haven. Bare trees, gray sky, the last of the autumn leaves pressed flat against the wet sidewalk. Beautifully ordinary. Meryl, I said, keeping my voice even. I didn't build Aldermore to prove anything to you. I know that's what you say, but it's what I mean. I waited a moment to make sure she had heard the distinction. I built it because it was the only option I had and then because I loved it. Not for you, not for Dad, not for the family, for myself. That's very independent of you, she said. The word independent carrying, as it always had when she used it, a slight weight of reproach. Yes, I said. It is. A pause. Brittany, I'm your mother. I love you. I believe she meant that. I had stopped questioning whether she loved me. That question had resolved itself sometime in the past 2 years, and the resolution was this. She loved me in the way she was capable of loving, which was real but conditional in ways she was not aware enough to see. That was not a reason for contempt. It was just a fact. I know you do, I said, and I love you, but love isn't the question. Then what is? Whether I come back to being the person who needed your approval to feel like enough. And the answer to that is no. I'm not that person anymore. I can't be. Not because I'm angry. I'm not really, not anymore, but because she's gone. I've been someone else for 2 years now, and I'm not going back. The silence on the line was long. I don't know what you want from me, Meryl said finally. Her voice was quieter, the performance layer thinner, the way Zendaya's had been. I don't want anything from you right now, I said. I'm not saying never. I'm saying I need you to understand that the relationship we had before doesn't exist anymore. If there's something new to build, something where we're honest with each other and I don't have to be who you need me to be, I'm open to that, but it has to be new, not a return. Another long silence. That's a lot to ask, she said. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to decide right now. She did not say goodbye. She simply went quiet and then the line ended. Not hung up angrily, just closed, the way a door closes when someone steps back from it to think. I set the phone on the table. Outside, the November light continued its slow, low arc across the sky. A sparrow landed on the windowsill, considered the scene, and flew away. I finished my coffee. I picked up the project proposal. I started reading. This was my life now. This apartment, this table, this light, this work. The city I had chosen, the company I had built, the team that showed up on Monday mornings and did real things with real skill for real clients who trusted us. It was not the life I had planned at 19, sitting in a house that never felt like mine, watching my father take a call he considered important. It was better, imperfect, unfinished, uncertain in the ways that all real things are uncertain. But it was built on ground that was mine, in the direction I had chosen, with the materials I had gathered myself. And that made all the difference. I am 34 years old now. Aldermore Design has 16 full-time employees. Our portfolio of completed commercial and residential projects is currently valued at $8.2 million. We are in the final planning stages of the most ambitious project we have taken on. A mixed-use development in New Haven, 3 buildings, residential above, commercial below, designed around the same principle that has guided every project I have done since the penthouse in Hartford. Start with the light. Eleanor Voss is still my business partner. We have dinner at her farmhouse every few months, and she still opens bottles of wine she has saved for no particular occasion, and her cat is still asleep in the same armchair. We have stopped needing to talk about the fact that we trust each other because it has become something we simply live. Nathan Briggs handles all of Aldermore's legal work. He has referred me to 2 other attorneys in his network who have become trusted advisors. Last spring, he called to tell me he was getting married. I sent flowers. Carol Reyes, my bookkeeper, has become something closer to a CFO as the company has grown. She still sends me a late payment notice the day after a client invoice is overdue. I still appreciate it every time. Lisa Park manages our project operations with a precision that makes everything I was doing alone in those early months look like controlled chaos in comparison. She negotiated her own salary increase last year before I had a chance to offer it. I respected that even more the second time. The Aldermore Creative Hub in Westport has 21 regular tenants. 3 of them have completed their first client projects in the past 6 months and are still here, still building. One of them knocked on my office door last month to tell me that the space had saved her. Not her business, her. I told her it was the space and her own work and the fact that she had showed up every day, and all of those things were true. My grandfather Harvey Walker's pocket watch is on my desk. Dorothy brought it to me on her second visit to the hub, wrapped in a cloth, presented without ceremony. I look at it every morning before I start work. My father has written 5 letters. I have read every one. The letters have changed. The first was about accomplishment, about the number that registered on his scale, and I understood that and accepted it for what it was. The second and third were shorter, more uncertain, less about what I had built, and more about what he was trying to understand about himself. The fourth was a single paragraph about a memory. A weekend when I was 12 and we drove to a salvage yard to find an old window frame for a project my mother had given up on. And I had spent 3 hours looking at every piece of architectural detail in the yard and asking questions he hadn't known the answers to. He said he had not understood at the time what he was watching. He said he thought about it now. I have not replied to any of them. I am not ready. That is not a permanent answer. It is just the honest one. My mother and I have spoken twice since the November phone call. The conversations have been short, careful, and genuine in a way our conversations were rarely genuine before. She does not ask me to come home anymore. I do not tell her she should have done better. We are, tentatively, something new. 2 people who share a history and are trying to find out whether there is a present that can hold both the truth of that history and the possibility of something different. It is slow. It is uncertain. It is possibly enough to work with. Zendaya and I have not spoken since the phone call. I don't know what her life looks like now. I don't spend time imagining it, either to feel satisfaction or to feel concern. I meant what I said to her. I forgive her. I wish her well. That is where I live on the subject of my sister, and it is a livable place. And here is what I carry with you as we reach the end. I did not tell this story so you would be angry at my family. They are people, limited, frightened in their own ways, shaped by things that shaped them before I ever arrived. My father was taught that value had a number attached to it, and he spent 60 years being right about that, often enough that he forgot it wasn't always true. My mother was taught that love was something you managed, and she managed it as best she knew how. My sister was terrified in the deep structural way that if I turned out to be enough, her entire identity, built on being more than me, would need to be rebuilt from scratch. They were wrong, all of them, but they were not strangers. They were the people I came from, and that is what made it cost what it cost. What I know now, on the other side of it, is this. You do not need the permission of the people who gave up on you to begin again. You need a door. Sometimes you build that door yourself, one $950 project at a time, until you have built something no one can take away. Sometimes someone like Eleanor Voss is already holding it open, because she remembers what it felt like to stand on the other side of it, and she has decided that she will not be the kind of person who lets it close. Either way, the door is yours. Setting boundaries with the people who were supposed to love you without conditions is not abandonment. It is not cruelty. It is the decision to stop asking for something from a place that cannot give it, and to build the thing you need somewhere else, with the materials you have. The best revenge is not proving them wrong. The best revenge is building a life so full, so genuinely yours, so rooted in what you actually are, that their opinion of you no longer fits anywhere inside it. That is where I am today. In a life that is full of real things. Real work, real partners, real mornings with coffee and light, and the watch my grandfather wanted me to have. It took everything I had to get here. It was worth every bit of it, and that is my story. If you made it all the way to the end of this, I want you to know, I see you. Wherever you are listening from, whatever you are carrying, whatever door you are standing in front of right now, trying to decide whether to walk through, I see you. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you something you needed today, please share it with someone who might need it too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be so grateful if you would. It's free. It takes 1 second, and it tells me that these stories are worth telling. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. It means more than you know.